You're listening to Body Banter, a podcast where we have conversations about the human body in all its forms and from as many perspectives we can find.
We are your hosts, Jon Cornwall
and Claudia Krebs.
And we are professors of anatomy in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada.
Anatomy is for everybody and every body, and we're here to get the body banter going.
We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Body Banter. My name's Claudia Krebs, and I'm joining you from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam Nation, also known as the Vancouver Point Grey campus. And with me, of course, is Shagan. Hi, Shagan. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Claudia. Hi, everyone, and welcome again to Body Banter. I am Jon Cornwall. I am coming to you today from Kelowna, which is the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nations. And we've got a really special guest today, and I will allow him to introduce himself. Hi, Jon.
Hey, Shagan. How you doing? My name's Jon Cornwall. Hello, everybody. I'm in, I would say, sunny Dunedin at the bottom of New Zealand, but it's not. It's actually raining. It's 11 a.m. here on a very cold winter's day, and it's nice to have you all on the podcast.
Fantastic. Welcome, Jon. And we are excited to talk to you, Jon, because your name has come up quite a bit, quite a lot in discussion about anatomy and about ethics in anatomy and ethics in just science and scientific work and so on. And we just want to maybe start the conversation by asking you how you got started in your scientific journey and your scholarly work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Shagan, thank you. And it's a long and convoluted story, but I'll do my best to make it interesting. So I started life as a physiotherapist more decades ago than I would care to remember or admit. And after a decade and a half of that, I decided I wanted a new challenge, and I thought about academia, and I'd already acquired a master's degree in anatomy, and I took the jump and came back into university to do my PhD. My PhD was in benchtop science. I was looking at back muscles, specifically multifidus and the transversus spinal muscles. And I spent 18 months dissecting and then another 18 months learning various benchtop techniques like immunohistochemistry. And these were all brand new to me, and it was a lot of fun. And I saw my future as working in anatomy departments, teaching gross anatomy. I think that was probably the aim. And it was one of my supervisors that first planted the seed around things to do with ethics. And this came as a result of a conversation we were having about the body donors, because doing 18 months of dissection involved me sitting in a room that wasn't where all the donors were, where all the med students go to commonly do their dissection and they're looking at bodies, but it was where the prosectors were. And the prosectors would bring bodies in, and then they would dismember them, they would dissect them, they would prepare them. And 18 months is a long time to watch this from the corner of the room, wondering about why people do what they do in regards to body donation. I started thinking about people and why they would donate, and if their families knew they donated. And I would talk to my supervisor about this, and he had an idea. And he had an idea about a study to look at the demographic profile of body donors, and not just in New Zealand, and a couple of other countries around the world. And so we teamed up with a couple of people. One was Graham Lowe in South Africa, and the other one is a chap whose name I forget. It was a wee while ago now, in Ireland. And we undertook a study of people registering to donate their bodies, and that lasted over 12 months. I think we were collecting data. And that was really the first project where I started thinking and gathering information about body donation. And that was still kind of on the side. I was looking at benchtop science. I was interested in muscle and muscle physiology, and I was publishing papers from my PhD. I graduated with my PhD. I started working in academic institutions with a focus mostly on anatomy and physiology. Those are my roles, teaching science and bioscience and health professional courses. And on the side, I started doing another couple of projects. I wondered about the use of of donors? How widely used were donors? The next project we undertook in the department was looking at the number of courses that donors were used for. And that really opened my eyes to how widely utilized the body donors were inside our institution. A huge number of courses, undergraduate and postgraduate. And from there, I started thinking about, well, the plastinates we make, how much do we use them? So it came back to thinking about how much utility there was in people donating their body to science. On the other hand, I was still struggling away to find a permanent job doing the thing I really wanted to do, which was teaching anatomy. And I was failing spectacularly. So on the other hand, I still had this interest in what was happening with donors. And I popped off to, I think it was Beijing, the IFAA conference. And I had a couple of items to take along there that weren't focused on what I thought was my primary line of work, or what was going to be my primary line of work, which was gross anatomy and physiology. But I took along a couple of pieces that were focused on body donation. And before I went, I had a look at the program, and I found a couple of individuals whose work looked quite interesting. And I actually knew them from the literature because they were quite popular. One of them was Sabine Hildebrandt, and the other one was Tom Chamney. And I didn't know if they knew each other. And quite independently, I emailed them both and said, hey, look, really like your work. Just wonder if you've got time at the conference to sit down for a cup of coffee, because I'd really like to hear about what you do. And somewhat luckily for me, both replied in the affirmative. And here's a lesson to young academics and students. If you're going off to a conference, always have a look at the program beforehand to see if you can identify people working in the same area as you, and take a chance. Send an email out into the webosphere and see if people will email you back, willing to have a chat. Because I've found 95 times out of 100, not that I've sent 100 invitations out, but you know what I mean. You'll get people back saying, yeah, I'd love to meet. And you just never know where that conversation is going to go. Because through independently meeting with Sabine and Tom in Beijing, which I think was 2014 or 15, we hit it off. We worked in the same kind of area, same kind of style, and we've been very, very good friends and collaborators since day one. And at that conference, after I talked to Sabine, she said, hey, look, there's a guy you really have to meet. His name's Andreas Winkelmann, and he's from Germany, and he does a lot of work in this area, and he'd love to talk to you about what you're doing as well. So I went and I met Andreas, and I got invited to the symposium that they were doing there, which I think was around, it was something ethics related. And I remember at the time how few people there were in the room. The symposia on ethics then were not popular, and we got the distinct impression, or I got the distinct impression, that people weren't really working much in this area. So I was one of the spare bodies at this symposium, and after chatting to Andreas, he said, hey, look, we really need people from your part of the world on this kind of ethics committee thing that we have, which is the ethics committee for the International Federation of Association of Anatomists. It's called FICAM. And I'd never heard of it. I'd never thought of committees. I'd never thought of ethical structure. And but the invitation to be on a committee, whatever that was just too good to turn down. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll come along. I'll have a go. Don't know what it involves, but yes, I'm there. Anyway, that started the conversation with Andreas. It started the conversation with Sabine, started the conversation with Tom. But yet here I am still struggling to find a regular job in anatomy, teaching anatomy. I'd managed actually to find a fellowship in a faculty of law of all things. Now, that was focused on looking at the Human Tissue Act in New Zealand. So the Human Tissue Act oversees what happens with human tissue, somewhat logically. And it also contains within the law that relates to human tissue related to the practice of body donation. And so I was looking at this and becoming very familiar with the law, and also trying to identify the gaps in the law in relation to what people were doing with bodies when they came in as donors to medical science. And one of the things that I identified with a colleague I was working with there was things around images. And we were kind of thinking, there's nothing in here about images, and yet images of bodies and donated bodies and dissected bodies, they seem to be pretty easy to get. And what is it about kind of ethics and permissions and privacy that we're not realizing? Is this actually a thing? And so I think it was a couple of years before I went to the IFAA conference and met Andreas, Tom, and Sabine. And I started doing work focused on images and images and body donation. I think looking in my folder the other day, I found the first thing I did on that was 2013. And at that time, I don't think anyone else had really looked at this, especially in relation to body donation and use of body donors. And that, I think, was really the first time that I started thinking specifically about ethics-related stuff and drawing a distinction between the law and what the law allows and what ethical practice is. And that was probably the seed being planted for me, thinking more about the application of digital technologies. And of course, the more you look, the more you find.
Yeah.
In the next few years. Sorry.
No. I was just going to interrupt a little bit, John, to say, that's a fascinating story, and I like how you link that more, that the moral of students finding, finding a network that can support them in what they do.
Yeah.
I'm really wondering about, because it seems from what you just said, it was like a small number of people, a small group of people interested in ethics to start with. And I'm wondering whether, some 10 years later, whether that network, how is that a big network of people still working or thinking about ethics? And also, maybe just as you answer that, to see that the work in ethics, you've linked it now to body donation. You've talked a little bit about law. You've talked a little bit about images. You've talked a little bit. So it's like, it's quite expansive. It touches almost on like a very widespread area of work. Anything that people are working on in terms of maybe dealing with human beings, that are dealing with the human body, can also be linked to ethics. So I've asked two questions. I'm asking you about the network. How large is your network now? And what do you think about, just the breadth of ethics, how, it spreads to almost every area that deals with a human being?
Yeah, so I'll do my best to answer that. So my network and the global network, my network has grown just because, one, I'm old, and two, I've been playing in this area for a while. And the more things you do, the more people you meet. So if I go to a conference, I'll meet people, and they'll once they display curiosity and tell me they might be interested in ethics, they can't go. They can't escape, rather. I won't let them go. They're friends forever. And I'll chase them to the ends of the earth, right? And so you end up developing a larger and larger network of people, and then you get people that you bump into that you start working with. For instance, there was an ASE, Anatomical Science Education board meeting in San Diego, and the guy I was sitting next to, I was kind of funny, and I thought, well, he's walking the same direction with me. I have a bit of a chat, so we're both walking the same direction. Ended up, this was Bruce Wayneman. We got on like a house on fire. And then during the conversation, as we were walking, he said, we've got medical assistance and dying in Canada, and I want to tell someone about it, but I don't know how to write this. Would you like to work on a project? So then he couldn't escape. I had him, and we wrote up a paper on MAID. And so my networks have grown just because I've chatted to people who've had an interest, and if there's something in common, we write on it. At the same time, I think there's been a global expansion and interest in ethical stuff. Now, whether this is just cyclic or whether it's related to what's happening in society with people being more aware of rights and their own privacy and issues like that, and with digital media and social media, people are now becoming just more aware and more able and more likely to tell people what they feel and what they think is right and wrong. I don't know. That's my suspicion anyway. But what I see in the community and inside the academic community is ethics is becoming more visible. It's certainly more visible than it was 10 years ago. We had the recent AAA conference where there were any number of ethics-related symposia and events. I don't know the history of the AAA going back many years, but I suspect from people I talked to, this was one of the conferences with the most ethics-type content on it. The upcoming IFAA conference in Korea this September, there are 8 different symposia which are specifically focused on ethics. Now, when the program initially came out, it had no ethics stream, and we lobbied through the president of the IFAA, Bev Kramer, to get our own stream, and we got it. And here we are with what I think is, again, the highest proportion of symposia on one subject. So that's great. In my view of the IFA conferences the last few years, the ethics content has been growing. So it's increasing in popularity. And again, whether that's cyclic or something else, I don't know, but it's certainly a good thing. It seems that, I'm kind of in the right place at the right time, surfing a wave. The other question you had was about ethics being kind of everywhere. And I think that dovetails nicely into it growing in visibility, because people start realizing, we haven't actually looked at this. Where is the evidence for what we're doing? From my mind, the simple way of thinking about this is you look at an overlap or congruence between the law, ethical perspectives, and what people say is permissible or allowable or not. And often what we have inside the medical sciences is we have people who say, we think this is right. We're certain that it happens within the law, but what they haven't done is actually gone and got any feedback or information about what the public think about it. An easy example here is something like international transfer of bodies. If you donate your body to a medical program, and given what we know about this, which is often a community decision or a decision to assist locally, would you agree that they could take your body and send it to another country, whatever country that was? Now, it may be very well that most people say, yeah, well, I have no problem with this. But it also may be that most people say, actually, no, we don't want to do that. And my family doesn't want you to do that either. But how do you know? And so it's all these questions, I think, which people are now becoming more aware of. People are more likely to stand up and say, hey, look, actually, do we have any evidence for that? I mean, we're scientists, but do we have evidence for our position? And part of my role in working in this field is not so much to tell people what is right or wrong. I can help with framing perspectives given what I know about international perspectives on this. So in essence, I can provide a guide, but I can't provide the evidence. It's up to people to go and look for the evidence themselves.
So, Jon, that's really interesting, the way you're sort of framing that journey and the way the field has grown and the questions that are being asked. I want to take you back to the early days of your PhD as you're sitting there and doing your dissections, because that's when the first questions came up in your mind around the ethics of what you were doing and what you observed other people doing. What prompted those questions? So what was going on inside of your head? What was the environment that you were in outside of the anatomy lab that allowed for these ideas to coalesce?
It was probably that it was such I hesitate to use the word bizarre, but the environment is sort of unworldly. It's not a normal environment to be seeing people dismembered in front of you. I mean that to me, there was some sort of cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, I'm trying to be an anatomist and learn my trade and do my apprenticeship. And on the other one, you've got something which is completely unnatural or appears unnatural. I remember going to a warehouse. So at that time, the bodies were stored in a warehouse. So the donors would come and they'd be embalmed, they're taken off to a warehouse. And I wanted to do a specific type of immunohistochemistry, which we couldn't do on alcohol embalmed bodies. And they did have some others. And one of them was in a tank, a fluid-filled tank. And so I was taken to this warehouse, and that's very bizarre. You see bodies lined up on shelves across the wall, and it's not something you see every day. Heaven forbid someone tried to break into that warehouse in the middle of the night. I don't think they would have stayed in there very long. Anyway, I'm taken along to this bin, which is fluid filled. The lid is taken off, and there's this donor in there, face down, gently bobbing, and I had to dissect their back while they're bobbing and remove muscle tissues. That's just so weird. That creates so many thoughts in your mind about, on the one hand, what I'm doing is scientific and this person donated their body. On the other hand, this is just so unnatural, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned this sort of unnaturalness of the environment that you're in. There's a real transgression that happens when you do anatomy. I was reading about this sort of for one of my courses that I'm teaching, how the integrity of the body is something that we care about a lot. And in fact, every surgeon, when they're done with their surgery, will sew the person back up to provide that, maintain the integrity of the body. We keep the insides on the inside. As an anatomist, you don't bring the insides out and you don't put them back necessarily. So that appears to be something that across millennia, humans have found to be a real transgression, to have the insides on the outside. So is that, you want to pick up that thought and how that interfaces with what you were thinking at that time?
Oh, I don't know if I can explain it better, to tell you the truth. No, I've got nothing. Apart from the fact that, one of the concerns I have, one of the thoughts I have about making that normal, because in the end, it's like students going into the dissection room to face donors for the first time. It's very unnatural. But what we know is that if you expose them enough times, most of them comes to grip with it and they see the benefit in it. And it is not, the 20th time they go in is very different to the first time they go in. So there's a desensitization. There's a change in I don't know if I call it social mores. It's a social more of a type. There's a change over time, so it becomes more acceptable and permissible. And herein lies one of the ethical interests of mine is let's think about digital images, for instance. If we were completely permissible with regard to images from dissection room and flooded social media with them, what are we doing to the social mores of people? I think it's not a bad thing that our initial instinct to seeing a donor who is dead and removing organs is that it's unnatural. What happens if you make that natural for the everyday person walking down the street? What does that do for their respect for a person, a body, and or the dead? So that's kind of a thought. One of the things I've done recently with a student who was of Pacifica heritage, so his mother is Samoan and he's half Samoan, half New Zealand European, was looking at the impact of culture on the dissection room. And that's really fascinating because if you look through the literature, there is almost nothing on how different cultures engage with the DR. In thinking about it, there's this almost westernized approach, this colonialized approach whereby, by God, you're going in there, you're going to start dissecting, you'll learn your anatomy, and out you go. But hardly ever now in a lot of parts of the world, you have homogeneous cohorts of students. You have real cross sections of students from different cultures. And so the interest to me, and this was Jacob's idea because I had never really reflected on this previously, was, well, okay, if we have Pacific students of Pacifica heritage, how are they going to deal with this any different to anyone else? Is it actually different for them when they go in? And it is, because there are things related to their culture around death, dying, and interacting with the dead that are completely different to us New Zealand Europeans. And so it's just fascinating that different cultures will have different ways with engaging with the dead. And yet here we are in these academic institutions teaching medical courses whereby we expect the approach to be systematic and intellectual. And yet the amount of work that's being done on this is none. There's one short communication from 2013 and another paper from the Middle East in 2015 kind of says we looked at culture, but we couldn't really see anything there. But it's just fascinating that now here we are in an era where people are very conscious of culture and social interactions and what that means for different cultures. And yet in the DR, we haven't really thought about it much. That to me is fascinating.
Absolutely. That's very profound, Jon. And I have come across some of those writings about how the attitude and the worldview of the Pacifica, as it concerns death and dying and concerns actual exposure to a body donor in an anatomy lab, for example. And the view is not universal and it's not Western centric at all. And it's something that really needs to be carefully thought through. And it brings me to maybe slightly different, but it's in the same general area of how different individuals and different people groups have different stories. and how and we're revisiting it now in terms of the images, and you talked about images earlier, the images that we show or that are allowed to be shown in terms of the body, how up till very recently have told only a single story. It's just the white male body, and how we're moving away from that and recognizing that there's a whole variety of attitudes, a whole variety of perspectives that we must bring to bear in terms of what our students study and the impact that these are having on our students. And that's really, really important. And I wonder whether you can speak a little bit more about that.
Oh, probably. I know a little bit about it, but not so much. I mean, the expert here is probably Melissa Carroll and Sabine Hildebrand, who've been doing a lot of work on equity and diversity. But it's certainly something which has more come to the fore. The Pop Art Project. I don't know, Claudia, if you know that any of that's been made public yet, or it's on its way. But there's certainly a lot of images and graphical representations coming that provide more awareness around equity and diversity.
Yeah, I can illustrate it a little bit in terms of that there is an ethical imperative that people are exposed to bodies that they can relate to, or in a way that they want to experience it. So you've spoken, for example, about Pacifica, and I know in like places in Eastern Nigeria or Western Nigeria, where I come from, how there are, I grew up listening to folklore, like my dad, stories that my dad will tell me about ghosts and about, the bodies after people have passed on, and about how you are not allowed to interact with the dead body in particular ways, for example. And so, maybe the broader question is that there is an ethical imperative to listen to those voices, to allow those experiences and allow those interactions in those diverse ways to happen, and not constrain the entire experience in the anatomy lab to the Western-centric view of things. So that's probably what we're asking you about. Do you think that there is probably an ethical case to be made for that type of diverse experiences in the anatomy lab?
Yeah, I think this kind of moves slightly away from the ethical things that I do, but I think it comes back to being what kind of educational delivery is ethically appropriate. And I think here about authenticity of experience. Can you be authentic? So let's take an example of medical students from diverse cultures. We're trying to get them from A at the start of the course to B, being qualified doctors, and to have them feel like they can't be authentic with their culture during that course. I think, what are the pros and cons of that? Is that something we really want to do? Because if we think about the DR and everyone having uniform behavior and not displaying their reactions that are authentic to their culture, is that appropriate or not? And I think it's more likely to be down the end of not. I mean, there's such great learning to be had for multiple reasons. Why? I mean, students, I think it's not a bad thing if they get an understanding of other cultures and how other cultures engage and interrelate in lots of ways. It's useful for them as health professionals. Inside the DR, I think it's a bad thing if people think they can't be authentic to their culture, because it denies them the opportunity, and it creates a dissonance for them in terms of feeling like they have to and I can't think of the right word, they have to do what everyone else does. And other students don't get to learn about other cultures in the way that they may relate to the dead. One of the suggestions from some work I've been doing recently is, it might be useful to prepare students in a way that allows them to be authentic and giving them permission to do it. Students, I think, will always ask for more resources. If you ask them if they need more resources, they'll say yes. And so then if you don't have an infinite supply of money, it comes back to how can we better prepare people to make the most of the experience? And to my mind, one of the key parts that came up in the work that Jacob did last year was about giving people the permission to be authentic some of the reports from Pacifica students that we had was they felt they had to do what all the European students were doing so that they didn't appear frail or weak, because they have a certain way of engaging with the dead that isn't how the Western students would do it. And so I think if your question is it ethically appropriate to be giving people educational opportunities whereby they can be authentic to their culture but still learn the skills that are required to be good health professionals when they qualify, I think the answer is yes.
That's such a good point, of allowing the authenticity of dealing with the dead, with dead bodies, and making space for students, and holding that space.
Yeah, it's a learning experience for all students. So if your European, New Zealand European student sees a Pacific student interacting with bodies in a particular way, or a Māori student interacting with bodies in a particular way, that also gives them the opportunity to learn about something that happens, you know, in the real world, and it also gives them the opportunity to inquire and engage that. And it's part of professional identity formation. It's part of personal growth. So you know, I see it as a win-win. There's no reason why we shouldn't be trying to do that. And I'm just kind of dumbfounded when I look through literature that this hasn't been a thing previously, right? Why have we just not thought about this?
I think we haven't thought about it out loud because these are difficult questions. I think people think about it very quietly inside of their own heads. And thank you for your courage to think about it out loud, because it.
Well, thank Jacob. I mean, he had the idea originally, and I was thinking, look, he wants to do this thing related to culture, and I'm interested in this other thing. And then, you know, after we discussed it, I thought, actually, no, that's quite interesting. So it took one student of Pacifica culture the courage to stand up and go, look, I think this is quite important. I'd like to do this, and good on him.
Yes, but it took an open ear from an educator to hear that student and to move it forward. So thank you for that. So what is it like coming into your dissection room? I think it would be quite unique because you do have this focus on ethical practice, and holding space for different sort of cultural approaches. Paint us a picture what it's like coming into your dissection room as a first-year medical student.
So we have an interesting program for students, which tries to give them the easiest ride possible into the space, while also integrating elements of Māori culture and support as well. So the dominant Indigenous culture in New Zealand are the Māori people, and I think they make up 20% of the population. I think Pacifica persons, which is Pacifica people from Tonga, Samoa, Tokelau, Niue, they make up maybe 10 to 15% of the population. But in New Zealand, it's well, based around the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed between the Crown and the Indigenous Māori population when the New Zealand Europeans arrived. We have rights and obligations to be integrating Māori culture into everything we do. So we bear that in mind, or that was borne in mind when the introduction to the dissection room was developed. What happens for us is when the students come into second year medicine, which is the first proper year of medicine, they have an intermediate year first. They have some sessions in the dissection room, but not near body donors. So big dissection room, donors all down on tables one end, spaces and tables the other end for prosections and plastinates. And after, I think, 3 or 4 weeks of engaging with plastinates down one end, they're given 2 sessions on one day, whereby they're introduced to concepts around how the dissection room experience will be delivered and how they can manage that. There's one lecture on the ethics and history of dissection and the use of body donors, whereby the history around access to bodies and body donation in New Zealand and body donation for our university is outlined. The behaviours are outlined in regard to the expectations around interaction and treatment of body donors at our institution. So they're given the whole background around the what, the why, and the how. And the second session involves viewing a shortened documentary, which was, I think, filmed here in 2009 9 or 11 called Donated to Science, whereby in that documentary, they interviewed body donors before they died, so as people with terminal illnesses. And then they also interviewed the families of the donors, and they interviewed the students before they went into the DR, and then they followed the students through that year of medical school and interviewed them as well. Just to give the students of the year that's coming in now a little bit of an idea about what previous students have experienced. The next step is within the next week, I think, they go to the dissection room to the area where the body donors are, but the donors are inside bags. And there is what's called whakawatea, which is a Māori ceremony, which is a spiritual ceremony, which provides permission and cleansing for the students in that area. And all religions and denominations are invited. So it's not framed as a religious ceremony, it's framed as a spiritual ceremony. They have a Māori elder there to provide support for the students. I think that ceremony takes less than half an hour. And then they're prepared for their first session meeting the body donors. And after the whakawatea, I think it's within the next few days or week, they have a session whereby in their groups, they go in for 20 minutes and they're in groups with some of the academic staff, and the academic staff will slowly unzip the bag. They will, again, remind them about the history of donors and how the donors have come to be there, and the donors gave permission for this, and the donors provided informed consent, and the donors wanted to be useful and provide the basis for their education. The bags will be slowly unzipped. The genitals and the face will be covered. Students are encouraged to talk and ask questions and touch the donor. So that's a 20-minute kind of engagement with the donor and the academic staff member there. And then a couple of weeks later, they might come back and they might start doing a small amount of dissection. And so through that year, they have intermittent periods of dissection. And then when they come back the following year, it's all dissection. And so the plan is really to give them an introduction to the dissection room, which provides ethics and history about why it exists and what it's there for, and give them some spiritual guidance and support as well in terms of the whakawatea and providing a Māori elder. And I think in the first dissection session, the Māori elder comes along as well to provide spiritual support for people.
That's such a beautiful introduction to the human body and to the study of the human body. And I think that it's something that a lot of people who work in the area of anatomy and dissections, there's something that we can learn from the way it's practiced in New Zealand, and particularly at your institution. Over here at UBC, obviously, and I'm sure perhaps there's something similar to that as well. Our students and staff and faculty, we hold a memorial ceremony, which is it's a non-religious ceremony. It's just a ceremony at the end of the year where the students have been dissecting the body for a while, and they come to give thanks and thank the donors, and family members are invited. And it's one area that is very popular. Our students like doing it because it's their opportunity to really honor the donors and to show their gratitude to the donors and their families for what they do. But as I said, it's really across the board. So it's students from all backgrounds, from all cultures. They just do that at the end. And I wonder whether you do something similar.
We do. Yeah, we do. So we have a Thanksgiving service at the end of the year, which is multi-denominational. It's open to all religions and cultures. I think they do have a person, I think it may be Anglican, maybe Presbyterian, I can't remember, that helps lead part of the service, but it's really open for everyone and the families as well. The families are invited to bring photographs or images if they want to, of their loved ones. And there's part of the service which allows the families to go up and place the photos or the images up front too. Often you'll have students volunteering to do things like recitals or poetry, or a small violin piece or something that'll be woven into the event too.
Yeah. So I think in my mind, what I'm thinking of how far we've come, how far we've come in terms of, from those olden days, as it were, where the whole history of grave robbers and those where bodies were willy-nilly, treated without any respect, and the source and the provenance of human tissues were not known, or people didn't care so much, till today, where we absolutely care about how bodies are sourced, how donation is given, informed consent, and all of the ethical principles, benevolence of autonomy, and all of those things are taken into account. But I'm thinking, so what next, Jon? What's the future? What's the next level? If we've come so far and we still have a long way to go, what are the maybe like the grounds that still need to be covered in terms of ethics and consideration of anatomy and anatomical donations? Does any particular area come to mind?
Yeah, it's getting everyone on the same page, because the older I get and the more I know, the more I realize that the world's both a very big and very small place. And so having everyone understanding something about the existence of ethical frameworks is probably a goal of mine over the next kind of 4 or 5 years. We have parts of the world that we can't even access. We know there are anatomy associations there, but we don't get responses. We can't engage with them. There are countries, large countries, which don't have representation on the IFAA committees. For instance, India. You think about how big India is, and we don't have anyone on the ethics committee for the IFAA anyway. And a lot of places just don't have either access to or knowledge of the existing ethics frameworks, even the basic principles. So if you think about something like basic principles, think back to the good practice body donation document that the IFAA/FICAM published in 2012. I would bet that it's a small percentage of the world's anatomy associations have got that out to all their members and they actually know it exists. So to my mind, it's trying to ensure that there's communication around the world to all the associations and members about the existence of such guidelines. And that's not to say that people are going to be beaten over the head with them, but if you can't access them, if you don't know they're there, you can't debate them. And the thing to my mind about ethics guidelines is when they're developed with the world in mind, they are not set in stone and they are not law. They are things that people should, by and large, take heed of and use as guidance. But ethics and ethical frameworks are community informed. And while I think that most of the guidelines are usually, I would think, pretty accurate in terms of being good guidance, there may be some parts or portions where people say, hey, we don't agree with that, or hey, that's not a part of our practice. And it's so exciting for me to think that associations or members might pipe up and go, hey, Mr. Ethics guy, we don't really agree with that. Can we have a discussion? I'd love to hear from people. I think that there'd be nothing better. But my goal really for the next 5 years is to think about how do we communicate to people that some of these guidelines exist and that they actually could be quite useful. And an example would be the recent AAA recommendations for the management of legacy anatomical collections. Now that's useful. There's no other document out there, and it was Valerie de Leon's great idea to get people together and develop those. And I think they're really useful as a guide. But the circulation of those and getting them out to the rest of the world is a challenge. It's a challenge. I've circulated to colleagues in different parts of the world who say, thank you very much for that, had no idea it existed. And why would they? Unless you're reading a particular journal, a particular time, odds are it's going to be difficult for you to actually receive something like that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jon. I totally agree with you that the big piece is communicating our knowledge out, and especially in an area like this that remains very personal, very culturally tied, very much in the gray area of certainty, right? Like there's a lot of uncertainty in ethical discussions because of the way that our standards and ideas change over time, as they should, as we evolve and our societies change and evolve, hopefully always for the better. So thank you for all the work that you're doing in that. And
It's a pleasure.
yeah,
It's just a joy to work with colleagues like you and Shigun. I mean, the world becomes a smaller place the more people you know and the older you get, which is just wonderful.
I agree with that. There's a huge benefit to aging, which is
it's one of the few benefits, right?
that's right. Yeah, is definitely the growing network of friends and the growing understanding that comes with that.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, we've talked a lot about human bodies and your pathway into this very exciting realm of talking about the ethics around human bodies, how we deal with them, how we deal with the dead, how we deal with these images, the proliferation. But back to the basic human body, what's your favorite part of the body?
It has to be the thing I spent 18 months dissecting and 3 years looking at. It's the back and the transversus spinal muscles of the back, because I was looking down a dissecting microscope, a surgical microscope for most of that 18 months, and just the intricacy of the arrangement and how we're built. It just fascinated me, and I can't let that go.
Well, that's really no surprise, because somebody with such a solid ethical and moral compass must have a really good spine, and the erector spinae muscles are definitely involved in holding that up. So I'm not surprised that must be your favorite body part.
I like how you segue, Claudia. That's lovely.
Very nice. Yeah.
And so, Jon, do you have a least favorite body part?
Yeah, and it may be no surprise, it's exactly the same, because I when I finished my PhD, I did not want to look at another spine or back muscle for about 3 years. Really, like many students, well, it might have just been me, I was just sick to the death of doing anything related to back muscles. I didn't look at the literature. I got my publication out of the way. I didn't look at the literature. I did nothing for 3 years and thought, I'm never doing that again. But then slowly it came back to me and I thought, actually, no, that wasn't bad.
Yeah. And I guess my retort, if I can match what Claudia did, was to say that with the older you get and the farther you go, like the back is one area where you don't really, it's not a lot of fun.
It's not. No.
It's not a lot of fun with aging, as we have discussed just now. Well, so Jon, thank you so much for being part of our podcast today, and we have learned so much from you. And we will link some of your work and some of your website to this episode of the Body Banter. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, they will be able to do that. So thank you from me. And Claudia?
Yeah, thanks, Jon, for joining us and bringing this important discussion to the forefront. And I hope that people will continue to reach out to you to talk with the ethics guy about these topics and continue the conversation, because it is a continuous conversation as we build awareness and bring the message out there.
Yeah, and it is, you're right. It's an ongoing conversation, and I like nothing more than to hear from people and chat about what issues they might be facing. Shigun and Claudia, thank you so much for your kind invitation. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Jon, for joining us. And that concludes another episode of Body Banter. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Body Banter.
We are Claudia
and Shigun,
and we look forward to having you join us for more conversations about the human body next time.